Uh, okay, I think we should start. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are, dear Africa NCA Community of Practice members. We welcome you to this webinar that is being organized by the Community of Practice Secretariat and our partner institutions, AfDB, GGKP, UNEP-WCMC, WWF, and CSF. And we want to thank them, esteemed partner institutions, for organizing this webinar, specifically, which is timely in terms of the theme of our webinar, capturing the value of natural capital in Africa development finance for green growth and climate resilient. We thank you for situating time to be able to participate in these webinars that we organize monthly and sometimes bi-monthly. And we thank you for your commitment to advance NCA within your respective countries. So today's webinar, I will start. We shared the agenda for this webinar, and with your permission, we will endorse it and proceed with the webinar. With that, allow me to invite Ms. Ngao Banga, who is the Senior Environment Specialist from the World Bank, and also our TTL for the Africa NCA Community of Practice project, regional project. Over to you, Ngao.
Thank you so much, Peter, and good morning and good afternoon to everyone. I think Peter has introduced the title of our webinar. I think for me, it's really important that on behalf of the Secretariat, the Steering Committee, as well as the World Bank Global Program and Sustainability, to thank the partner institutions, specifically I'll read them out, the Africa Development Bank, who are the co-chairs for this community of practice, the Green Growth Knowledge Partnership, the GGKP, the World Wide Fund for Nature, and the UN Environment Program, World Conservation Monitoring Center, and the Conservation Strategy Fund for graciously accepting to actually host this important webinar under this theme. I think this webinar is very much timely, and as we continue to recognize all the efforts that all the members, as well as the NGOs and the different business partners to this community of practice, continue to play a critical role and how we disseminate and how we remain as a community to forge ahead this agenda that we have at our hands. And this has been happening, and all these partner institutions have been part of this agenda since the inception of the community of practice in Kampala in 2019. And so we continue to forge ahead as a community, and we remain, I think, grateful to all the participants that have joined today to listen to this webinar. So the webinar series that we host as a community of practice are organized monthly as well as bi-monthly in collaboration with the community members as well as with the partners. The community of practice will continue to serve as a platform, as we've always put it, as a platform for regional sharing of experiences in terms of this agenda, but also what it is that we're doing in our respective countries. We also support capacity building for mainstreaming natural capital content and policy, and we're very much enlightened to see this agenda become a critical part of most of the policymakers, as we noted at the last COP from the AfDB's report and announcement. And so the World Bank remains as a key partner to the community of practice in financing the community of practice, but also providing the strategic direction. As you may all be aware, the World Bank recently adopted a new a vision statement, which is ending poverty on a livable planet, which has, I think at this particular point, enlightened the role that natural capital accounting and biodiversity play in addressing the development challenges, as well as the triple planetary crisis, that is climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. So this webinar at this particular point really, I think, underpins and brings to the core the role of natural capital valuation, data accounting, analysis, and its role in informing policy in our African communities. In this context, I would like to draw your attention to the Nairobi Declaration, which I think is really a flagship for us as a community of practice, which we signed as a community of practice with the partner institutions, with the participating countries last year in September, in which really we try to emphasize the agency to protect and enhance capital, as well as ecosystem services for addressing the urgent developments in the most of the African countries collectively as a unit. Let me invite you all participants to really participate, freely share your questions through this webinar. It's really an interesting theme. I think let me just end my remarks by saying this webinar, which is titled Capturing the Value of Nature in Africa, Development Finance for Green Growth and Climate Resilience, is a topic that is timely. And so we really appreciate all these our experts and presenters will be discussing with us. Let me end here and over to our moderator to take us on to the next part. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Ngao, and thank you, Peter. Okay, so my name is Natalia Sanin. I'm going to be the moderator today. I am the training director of the Conservation Strategy Fund, CSF, a partner organization of the NC4ADF initiative dedicated to empowering diverse actors to integrate the value of nature into better decision-making. And we make this through applied analysis, capacity building, and combining our expertise in economics, finance, and conservation. And I'm pleased to introduce today's agenda and my colleagues from the World Bank, AfDB, the Green Growth Knowledge Partnership, WWF, and UNEP-WCMC, who will be presenting today. So we have 4 partners presenting today. The first 2 interventions will give us the context of this initiative, and the last 2 will offer some keynote presentations. After the interventions, we will have a Q&A round. You can write your questions at any moment in the Q&A chat. And I think this is it, and we can start with the first presentation from Dr. Innocent Ornan, Chief Natural Resource Officer from the AfDB, and he will give us an introduction to the NC4ADF initiative. So, Innocent, the room is yours.
Thank you, Natalia. Thank you, Natalia. I bring you warm greetings from the African Development Bank. The bank would like to thank the World Bank, the coordination of the African Natural Capital Accounting Community of Practice, of which I'm a co-chair. I also like to thank our key partners like CSF, GGKP, WWF, for organizing this webinar. The preparation, the planning, and the execution clearly shows that we are talking about the right topics at the right time, particularly coming after the Biodiversity COP16 as well as the Climate Change COP29. So capturing the value of nature in African development finance for green growth and climate resilience is arguably the most relevant topic in today's global discussion. When the natural world is disappearing at an unprecedented rate, global species loss is estimated to be up to 1,000 times higher than the naturally occurring extinction rate. WWF recently published a report which said that 1 million plant and animal species now face extinction, many within decades. 60% of terrestrial wildlife population have been lost in the last 50 years. Rainforests throughout the world are being cleared at a rate of 4 football fields per minute. These statistics is pointing to the fact that our topic of discussion today is very critical. And the African Development Bank recognized the importance of delivering on climate change and the global biodiversity framework related to financing. We continue to demonstrate this recently by the launch of the African Development Bank's 10-year strategy 2024 to 2033. This 10-year strategy for the first time has provided for investment in natural resources in an inclusive, green, climate resilient, and nature positive pathway, because the bank believes that these are essential ingredients, the vision of the strategy, which is a prosperous, inclusive, and resilient and integrated Africa. Also, our flagship report called the Africa Economic Outlook for 2023 focused on harnessing natural capital for climate finance and green growth in Africa. These are all opportunities that have been analyzed to ensure that we help Africa. Recently at COP29, the bank president, Dr. Kiuma Adesina, and our vice president and chief economist, Professor Kevin Chikaorama, successfully hosted 3 successful high-level events on measuring the green wealth of nations, natural capital, and economic productivity in Africa. They also had a ministerial meeting, as well as a presidential meeting that had some African Union heads of states and some other world leaders, where they had to discuss the same issue that we are talking about. So the mainstreaming natural capital in Africa Development Finance Initiative, NC4ADF in short, is going to be supporting this overall goal of the bank. It was an initiative that has been instrumental to ensure that we support natural capital mainstreaming in concrete climate adaptive outputs through engagement, advocacy, resource mobilization, concrete policy support, as well as capacity building. While the NC4ADF, the NC4ADF initiative has laid the foundation for natural capital-based green economies in Africa, we are ensuring that some of the 4 key pillars of the initiative continue to be discussed. One is on integrating natural capital in African infrastructure finance. The other pillar is to develop a business case for natural capital in developing finance institutions. The third pillar is to integrate natural capital in African sovereign credit ratings. And then the fourth pillar is to build the capacity of African countries for natural capital accounting and assessment. Our next speaker is going to drill down into these 4 pillars. But one thing that is very critical for me to mention during my remarks is that we couldn't have achieved this without the collaboration of key partners. Key partners have some seed funding for the NC4ADF initiative, GGKP with our technical role and coordination, WWF, IISD, UNEP-WCMC, WRI, and a whole list of others, including the government of Mozambique and Tanzania, for providing us with an opportunity to use their case studies, to make a business case for streaming natural capital and finance. Despite some of our initial challenges that we observed in the early days of NC4ADF, the project has helped to put on the agenda of most development finance institutions, particularly the AfDB, the critical role of natural capital as an asset to help us shape a sustainable development pathway. Hence, the African Development Bank will continue to support this initiative, but this time it will be through the broader agenda that was launched at COP29, the Measuring Green Wealth of Nations initiative. We'll also be expanding the Africa Natural Capital Accounting Committee of Practice, which is passed from 2025. So the bank recognizes that all our economies are embedded within nature, and we are taking steps to mainstream natural capital through the NC4ADF project, as well as the Measuring Green Wealth initiative. So clearly, ladies and gentlemen, momentum is building. So we should use this webinar to improve the way we articulate our options for designing integrated models for capturing the value of nature, as we will hear from our other 2 key presentations shortly. In conclusion, the African Development Bank welcomes your participation and wishes us successful deliberation. Thank you. And over to you, Natalia.
Thank you very much, Innocent, for your opening remarks. And I now invite Brittany King, project specialist from the Green Growth Knowledge Partnership, to give us an overview of the main components of work of this NC4ADF initiative. Excuse me.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Natalia. So let me just share my screen very quickly. All right. As Natalia so kindly introduced, my name is Brittany King. I'm a project specialist at the Green Growth Knowledge Partnership and lead our work on natural capital. I'm presenting the main components of the Natural Capital for African Development Finance Initiative, also known as NC4ADF, on behalf of GGKP's coordinator, Fabienne Pierre. The Green Growth Knowledge Partnership was originally created to provide a neutral platform where leading NGOs, intergovernmental organizations, and think tanks could come together to identify gaps in knowledge and data, co-create new tools and solutions, and apply and share these globally. This mission led to GGKP's involvement in the 6-year Economics for Nature program, which aimed to encourage the use of robust natural capital approaches and support the internalization of the value of nature in development, economic, spatial, and green growth planning processes. A key element of GGKP's role within this program was identifying, prioritizing, and addressing major knowledge gaps in mainstreaming natural capital in the green economy. While there is now a large body of existing science and data focused on the value of nature and its importance to economic and financial decision-making, it's still not often considered in development planning. Additionally, some of the tools development agencies and public finance agencies need don't exist. It was the recognition of this gap in implementation that led to the formation of the Natural Capital for African Development Finance Initiative. The NC4ADF initiative emerged as a culmination of efforts by a range of different organizations and initiatives to identify opportunities for ensuring that the value of nature and healthy ecosystems are considered and valued within economic and financial decision-making processes. The goal of NC4ADF was to lay the foundation for natural capital-based green economies in Africa by mainstreaming natural capital and development financing in Africa, particularly within the African Development Bank. As Dr. Innocent Ona mentioned in his introduction, the initiative's activities occurred under 4 pillars. Pillar 1 focused on integrating natural capital in African infrastructure finance. Under this pillar, and in partnership with the International Institute for Sustainable Development, UNEP-WCMC, and the World Resources Institute, the initiative focused on 2 practical case studies into the application of natural capital assessment. These were the Pemba-Lechinga Integrated Development Corridor in Mozambique and the Kakano Hydropower Project in Tanzania. These case studies provided valuable inputs into a technical note outlining a replicable methodology for natural capital assessment in infrastructure projects. In addition, in partnership with the World Resources Institute, the World Bank, and the African Development Bank, the initiative developed and curated a database of over 300 nature-based solution infrastructure projects in sub-Saharan Africa within multilateral development bank portfolios. Pillar 2 centered on developing a business case for natural capital among multilateral development banks. To this end, the NC4ADF initiative convened MDBs to develop a common vision for mainstreaming nature-based solutions in support of the MDB Joint Nature Statement, and established a technical working group on natural capital accounting for development finance under the African NCA Community of Practice. Pillar 3 was initially focused on integrating green growth and natural capital into sovereign risk assessments in partnership with credit rating agencies. However, due to practical limitations and the massive impact the COVID-19 pandemic has had on the global economy and societies, the initiative decided Pillar 3 should focus on promoting a natural capital-based post-COVID-19 green recovery in Africa. To that end, the partners developed 2 policy briefs created in collaboration with UNEP-WCMC and organized a webinar series on nature-based green recovery in Africa, engaging regional bodies on key themes such as green recovery policy frameworks and leveraging natural capital to catalyze green employment and economic growth. Pillar 4 focused on building capacity for natural capital accounting and assessment in Africa's green growth. The objective was to strengthen the capacity within AfDB and its regional member countries to apply natural capital-based green economy approaches. To do so, the NC4ADF partners collaborated with the Conservation Strategy Fund to develop an online training course, the Natural Capital Academy, and had 2 in-person workshops in Mozambique and Kenya to gather feedback from stakeholders. The Natural Capital Academy is expected to launch in 2025. In addition to these 4 pillars, the initiative undertook cross-cutting activities which supported all of them. These include the NC4ADF initiative site, which houses all of the resources developed throughout the project, and the 2 policy briefs and technical note on natural capital approaches, green recovery, and the role of and investment opportunities for development finance institutions. These publications include country-specific case studies, such as the Cape Town Water Fund, agroforestry and land restoration in Mali, and the Lukanga Swamp in Zambia. The 2 keynote presentations to come will lay out the importance of integrating natural capital considerations into investments and development projects within Africa, and how natural capital approaches and nature-based solutions can be implemented within these projects to provide overall better outcomes. And with that, I will turn it back over to Natalia.
Thank you very much, Brittany. And now we're going to start with keynote presentations. The first will be Peter Sharon, Africa Ecological Futures Program Leader from WWF, and he will be presenting on the role of Africa's financial sector in securing Africa's ecological futures. Peter, the room is yours. Let me see if we can hear you.
Thank you very much, Natalia. Does this work? You can hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
And I just checking, I saw in the chat box, some people were struggling seeing the share screen. Can I just confirm that that's been sorted out as well? So people can actually see the screen. Well, I'll share mine now just to test it.
I can see your screen, but please, if someone is struggling, let us know in the chat.
Good. I'll continue then. So yes, Natalia, thanks. So my name is Peter Scheren. I'm leading at the moment the WWF Africa Ecological Futures Initiative, which is actually a collaboration started between WWF and the African Development Bank, but in the meantime, as a larger partnership. And as such, we're also engaged in the Natural Capital for African Development Finance Initiative that's just been laid out before you. But what I'm going to talk about is actually, first of all, saying this webinar today is about mainstreaming natural capital and African development finance. And of course, the first thing is then to understand what's that African finance, what is that sector, so where is the money coming from, who's and how is it being spent at the moment. Because that, of course, will give us then the basis for defining what needs to happen in terms of better alignment with, as Innocent very already introduced, the ambitions that have been laid out before us in terms of addressing biodiversity loss, climate change, and other factors. So this presentation today that I'm going to be given is actually based on a report completed earlier this year on finance and investment in Africa. There's a study into the larger trends and developments in the finance sector, and reflecting on those trends in terms of potential penalty affecting the ecological futures of the continent and the natural capital base of the continent. I should recognize before I actually start, I saw Eugene. It was on one of the participants here. So just recognize as well that we have had a lot of collaborators in this program on natural capital for ADF. Eugene was one of the key consultants helping out in the initial stages of this process. Just recognize that he's on the call and his contribution. But with that, just maybe one slide on Africa Ecological Futures. So the thinking around this thought leadership work in terms of identifying and really analyzing deeply the trends and developments in Africa. It comes, of course, on the basis of Africa going through an enormous change over the past few decades, growth patterns in terms of economic development, urbanization, other big trends that are happening, changing economic trade relationships. They're shaping the future of this continent. And this, I always find it very illustrative. Look at the cover page of some of the magazines, what's being said about Africa. So you can see from 2000s, the hopeless continent, people talking about a lot of conflicts in the continent. The 2011, Africa rising, 2013, aspiring Africa, 2019, the scramble for Africa. Clearly, there's a dimension to African Development Bank that is reflected in rapid economic development on many different fronts. course, over the past few years, we've seen also challenges coming out of that. We've had the COVID crisis, we've had other factors, certainly issues about democracy and all over the continent. But all these bigger trends are influencing the future of the continent and basically the way that the continent develops in an ecologically sustainable or non-ecologically sustainable way. Finance is a critical factor in all of this. Money counts, as we all know. So it's money that drives a lot of these developments, whether it's direct investments, whether it's government investments. This is driving development, and this growth, as impressive as it is, of course, comes with challenges in terms of preserving Africa's natural capital base. A lot of economic development in Africa is actually based on the rich natural capital that the continent has, and that's the asset that the continent has. But obviously, we all know that if that asset would be depleted or would be lost, then that economic base would also be disappearing. So what we want to present is basically through our thinking is what we would like to see is indeed a rapid economic human development patterns in Africa. So poverty reduction, food security, securing that in a way that it's in the longer run ecologically sustainable and doesn't follow the path of many developed nations where those rich natural capital is actually lost in the meantime, like in Europe and the US. So where does the money come from is then the big question. So there are many different sources. This looks very complicated. It's not that much, but so there are many different sources of finance coming into the continents. We have, first of all, distinguished between foreign sources, money coming from outside of the continent, and domestic sources. And the foreign sources, you have private flows. So those are foreign direct investors, investments and portfolio investments like stocks and bonds. And we have public flows, which are often fed by external debt, so credit relationships with governments between foreign nations or multilateral organizations. And then we have official development aid. And on the domestic sources, we again have private flows and people putting money into investments, as well as money spent from tax revenues. That's kind of, in a simple way, reflection on the overall picture. So running through a few of these, the big trends we see, so one, foreign direct investments have been growing, certainly up to the COVID crisis, rapidly growing, growth in direct investments, so private money going into the continent. So total flow in 2021, which is just still accounting for post-COVID more or less, it's $83 billion coming in from that source. It's a big amount of money in the total global picture. Is still a relatively small share, but it's growing and it's intensifying. We also see the traditional money flows, basically direct investment is still coming from the same nations. The big ones are the United Kingdom, France, Netherlands, and the United States and China. So they account for the bulk of that foreign direct investments, with China taking a growing share into, as the diagram below shows, a rapidly growing share in those foreign direct investments. And the question is, of course, where does this money go? Those 83 billion, where do they go? And it really depends. If you look at like investment money coming from the UK or the US, a lot of that goes into aspects such as mining sector, financial services. There are critical sectors. What stands out a little bit is that China, in particular, is an outlier. So China is the exception in a way that there's an enormous amount of investment going into construction. I think we're all aware of that, beyond those traditional sectors of mining, extractives, and financial services. This just gives a picture here. I mean, the report has more detail, obviously, if you're interested to see where that money is going. This is, of course, important. Knowing where the money goes will say, do we have an issue or not if it comes to natural capital? In this case, obviously, investing in sectors such as extractives is investing in natural capital, use of natural capital for economic development, which has a positive economic effect, but also comes with implications, potential loss of other environmental assets. And construction sector, as we know as well, we have to be careful about. Then portfolio investment, these are to do with bonds structures, so the sovereign and supranational bond structures. This is much bigger, as we speak. Euro bonds into African countries accounted for 136.2. That's reflected against those 83 that I said earlier on foreign direct investments. And the African Development Bank being one of the biggest supplier of Euro bonds. If you put that reflect against how much of that bond money, so basically, I would say loans simplified, is going into green, then it's a fraction of that. And that's kind of where our concern obviously lays. So in terms of bonds that are aligned with nature positive, with actually investing in green, it's a relatively very small share of that bonds market at this point in time. Then external debt is a big one as well. So this is where governments, of course, get basically credits from foreign nations or lend, borrow money. And we all know that's an issue across Africa, where a lot of countries have huge debts and paying basically over 50% of their tax income into repaying those debts. That's a key issue. There's again a growing influence there of China. In some countries, it's very dominant into this. Again, details are in the report. We and also look at the so where is the money? Where is that money going into? So geographically, first of all, this diagram, as it shows, it goes into countries that are usually rich in natural capital, and Angola is a very, very big one here. Obviously because of the interests in mining and extractive industry. So it's interesting to see as well. So we're not just, it is enormous that debt kind of structures are very important, providing also opportunities like debt for nature swaps and so on, when we come to natural capital, but also seeing what's actually the guarantee behind those debts, because they will determine what we can do with it. Then ODA is still very important. So it's, people talking about ODA, overseas development assistance, becoming less important with the other financing streams coming on stream, which is true. It is less dominant than it used to be. Still quite important at 66.5 billion. And still therefore important contributor. Usually the spread of where the money is going, overseas development assistance going, is more kind of structured. And certainly, again, a lot is going in health and education, but certainly also considerable investments in nature conservation type of work and sectors that are nature positive. Then reflecting on all that, so once just come to an overview here. So it's interesting to see what of this funding that's coming in is actually going into green. And I already mentioned the issues around, for example, bonds. There's still a very small market for green bonds at this point in time. It's just a recent survey by the European Investment Bank showed that there's growing appetite to develop green bonds. So quite a few banks, apparently in these commercial banks, are looking into green bonds issuing. So there is potential there. By the way, just as we speak here, there is a parallel session going on presentation on the European Investment Bank report on finance in Africa. So unfortunately, this is overlapping with this webinar today. But I just really recommend having a look at that report. It's quite illustrative, with reflections on the finance sector and the growth in that in Africa. And then finally, on climate change, investment of that funding going into climate change, as we all know, it is still far below the target that was set and the needs of Africa. It is growing, so there's a considerable amount of money going directly or indirectly into climate-related finance, but still well below our target. So with that, just a quick overview, because putting all this in perspective will tell us why finance is important and which type of finance is important for us to think about when it comes to preserving natural capital in Africa and preserving the ecological futures of the continent. And so this gives an overview. The bulbs are basically representing what's the most important ones, particularly saying the bigger ones obviously have to do with, as for example, credit. So that's money. That's huge. This is money that governments request from bilateral, multilateral creditors, crediting organizations. including the African Development World Bank, IMF, and so on. So in that context, it's extremely important for us to think and work with the development finance institutions, that are creditors for this huge amount of funding. Similarly with bilateral creditors. Less important, but still relevant, is the bonds markets. And I mentioned particularly in the context of a potential growing market for green bonds and appetite in terms of green bonds and facilitating access to finance there. And then we have the foreign direct investments, which is more or less difficult to regulate markets because it's a kind of private sector funding coming in, but still critical. And overseas development assistance. So I won't go through all of this here, but you can read the report if you want to have more summary. We just wanted to give you this as a backdrop of what we're going to be discussing. Obviously, eventually what we want to achieve with influencing finance and working with finance institutions is making sure that there is more money going into green, so to say, funding that has a nature positive contribution, nature-based solutions and so on, which Ruben after me will be talking about. And avoiding the negativities associated with some of the investments. And there the issue comes in how, for example, we use natural capital accounting and assessment as a way of bringing the relevance of green investments more, greener investments more to the attention of the finance institutions. There's change agents here, so we also need to think at who do we deal with. So today we're talking about development finance institutions in particular, which is, as I mentioned earlier, a critical sector of the finance in Africa. It is extremely critical, but there are other finance streams for which we will have to deal more with working, for example, with financing regulations, financial regulators in countries, central banks in countries, ministries of finance, the regional economic commissions. And of course, with overseas development partners and others. So coming back to, as I showed on one of the first slides, what we want to achieve is this growth pattern, which avoids some of the negativities that are associated with growth in some of the other continents. Critical is for us to really understand that financing playing fields. This report, I think, is just the first step in that direction to understanding that better. The report clearly recognizes that traditional ways of safeguarding through environmental impact assessments, for example, mostly fall short. I know many of you will recognize this, that often EIAs are conducted at a very late stage in the process as a kind of a tick box. They're not really mainstreamed in the actual decision-making around economic development. And in that context, natural capital assessment tools are a much better way, a much better approach towards achieving their targets on bringing the relevance of natural capital and ecological sustainability really to the core of decision making. So with that note, I'll stop here. Of course, this presentation will be shared. There you will have access to a link on the report I just presented for those that are interested to read more. And with that, I'll hand back over to Natalia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. And we're doing very well with time. So would you like to answer just one question before we continue with Kiruben?
That's fine. If I've not followed the chat box, obviously, you'll have to help me there.
We still have some minutes from your time. I think we can use them to answer just one question, and then we continue.
Okay.
Yeah. Sonigito Ekpem wrote in the chat, if you could please kindly advise on the possibility of considering new mechanisms for subnational government that prioritize nature-based solutions in promoting natural capital investments, and how can this initiative, the NC4ADF, drive the carbon markets?
Okay, I'm just reading it here now. So new mechanisms for subnational governments, temporary orders. So first, just to talk a little bit about natural, the initiative we're presenting today has a very specific focus. It started off with trying to influence development finance institutions in Africa. So it's, as I say, as that doesn't mean, it's very relevant, obviously, but it doesn't solve all the issues. As we know, we need to promote these approaches, whether it's using, for example, natural capital accounting at country level or even at subnational level, as a way of internalizing those values into decision making. Yeah? So they're not considered for free anymore. They're part of the wealth of countries. So that approach absolutely is critical, in addition to what we're talking about today, which is influencing the finance. So those two need to go hand in hand. So carbon markets is not something we specifically looked at, but obviously carbon market comes in as an important driver behind many of the solutions. Whether it's providing additional incentives for conserving forests in many different ways, so renewable energy programs and so on, bringing nature-based solutions to some kind of a viability level or viability and feasibility level. Carbon markets are often obviously still critical in driving towards that viability and basically creating more opportunities there for nature-based solutions to become really implemented. So that's no question. Whether the NC4 ADF is the main vehicle for that, good question. Maybe Ruben wants to say something about that as well. We come back to that question. Certainly, I think it's critical, a critical element in the promotion of nature-based solutions, absolutely, at different levels. Yeah. Thank you very much. I hope I answered that question. It's a very good one, a very complex one as well, I have to say.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Peter, for addressing the question. And before we continue with Karen, I just want to remark that the webinar slides and the recording will be available to all participants and the members after the event. So I just wanted to clarify that because it's being asked in the chat. And now we're moving to our last presentation for today with Dr. Kiruben Naik, Senior Program Officer, Nature Economy from the UNEP-WCMC. He will present on financing green growth using nature-based solutions and natural capital approaches and the role of development finance institutions. So please, Dr. Kiruben, can I see if we can hear you?
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and see you perfectly. Thank you so much. Please go ahead.
I'm just sharing my screen. I think it is already on.
Yes, if you could please put it in presentation mode.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. And as Peter had highlighted, I will be presenting some of the technical aspects of what we are discussing today. And these are based on some of the policy briefs and technical note that Brittany mentioned earlier. So yeah, so my presentation will cover some of the conceptual clarifications that may emerge from the discussions, the context itself, Africa and the need for action, why natural capital matters for financing institutions, some of the case studies that was mentioned by Brittany and as well as Peter, and opportunities for development finance institutions, and the potential of natural capital approaches and NBS, particularly around, you know, at the country level, at the subnational level, at the local level. And I will touch on the evolving role of development finance institutions. Okay, so just up front, you know, I think it's quite important to reflect a little bit on the nature-based solutions and how it is actually defined. And I will go back to the UNEP-5 decision on what it really entails. Again, looking at the actions to protect, conserve, restore, sustainably use and manage natural or modified terrestrial, freshwater, coastal and marine ecosystems, which addresses social, economic and environmental challenges effectively and adaptively, while simultaneously providing human well-being, ecosystem services, resilience, and biodiversity benefits. And I think in this particular definition, it is quite broad to include approaches like natural capital, where natural capital is referred to as the stocks of natural assets, which include geology, soil, air, and water. The natural environment is viewed as a form of capital asset, or natural capital as we refer to it, which includes ecosystems and the important goods and services that emerge from natural capital and provides to the economy and to society. Natural capital approaches, again, is a term that we have coined together, bringing together a natural capital and a way of doing things for increasingly recognizing as a suitable way of integrating the value of natural capital into decision-making, policy development. And this has been taken up by the African Union, the African Development Bank, as we've seen, and the capitalist coalitions, as an example. So if just focusing a little bit about the African context, Africa holds about 30 to 50% of the global natural capital wealth, critical for development. Natural capital supports key economic sectors like your agriculture, water, and energy. Dependence on natural capital for the livelihoods and development is a way of life in Africa. Sustainable practices threaten ecosystems, reducing our economic stability. So again, there's a urgent need for action in Africa and around the world relating to natural capital and natural resources. The African Union Green Recovery Action Plan, prompted by post-COVID-19 recovery, also highlights the need for action and need for action on natural capital. And some of the work of the African Development Finance Initiative, as highlighted by Brittany, by the African Development Bank, WWF, and GGKP. This work is based on the, as I mentioned, on the technical note that was developed, as well as the policy briefs on natural capital and NBS solutions. This was supported by the MAVA Foundation, and under this particular initiative, the NC4 ADF initiative. And the focus is on mainstreaming natural capital in financing and decision-making. So why natural capital matters for financing institutions? I think this is a key question to ask. And it's all about sustainability, ensuring long-term viability of our ecosystems that actually support the economies. On risk mitigation, it reduces project failures linked to ecosystem degradation. There are many examples of where projects in Africa, particularly around drought mitigation, sedimentation issues, irrigation issues, where including natural capital or natural resources have actually benefited the project itself. On opportunities, high returns and co-benefits from nature-based solutions, example, job creation, and there are many examples in the literature relating how inclusion of natural capital has actually ensured a better return on investment when it comes to job creation, supporting livelihoods of people in Africa. I think there's been publications around 3 trillion in example in business opportunities, over 100 million jobs created, examples in the literature. And some of the tools that are available include, before I actually go on to the tools, I think that the link between these societal problems and the SDGs are quite important, and how it actually links to NBS and how NBS can actually support these initiatives are very, very important, and particularly these goals as well. SDG goals 13 and 15 on climate and on 15 as well. The links with food security, human health, water security, climate change. I think these are quite important links to make with the SDGs, and how NBS and natural capital approaches can support achieving these important goals. Some of the tools and methodologies that exist, natural capital assessments, like models like INVEST, ARIES, quantify ecosystem services. There are other tools related to unpacking ecosystem services, the typology of ecosystem services as reflected in the IUCN typology, and the SEA framework, or System of Environmental Economic Accounting. Data integration, these models ensure data integration, combine spatial, ecological, and economic data sets. We can use global data sets, but at the same time, it is critically important to have national data sets and local data sets as well. Scenario analysis, again, these models provide context-specific scenarios. It evaluates business as usual scenarios versus nature positive or development outcomes scenarios. Co-benefits, tools that highlight economic, environmental, and social benefits, example, job creation. My next slide. I think Brittany highlighted the case study, the Lukanga swamp in Zambia. This is a critical ecosystem that stabilizes water flow, which is essential for agriculture and energy. A natural capital assessment has indicated that the loss of this swamp's capacity has costed around 42 million annually. So this is a significant attribution to natural capital and the role of natural capital. The outcome, the impact is that it guided policies to mitigate ecosystem degradation and boost resilience. The outcome is that demonstrated the value of protecting ecosystems in development financing. Development finance institutions have shown that they are a catalyst for sustainable finance, leading efforts to shift investment towards nature positive policies Again, the focus has been on the sustainable blue economy finance principles. This is as an example of what are some of the policy and principles that development finance institutions have adopted. The Climate Finance Facility of the Development Bank of Southern Africa, the DBSA, supports low carbon infrastructure projects. They recently launched, in 2019, they launched the Green Bank model. Again, this Green Bank model focuses on natural capital and climate solutions. The African Development Bank's strategic shift to natural resources management and investment strategy, which is from 2023 to 2027. And it was very good to hear from Innocent on the 10-year investment strategy that was launched at COP16. Also, just highlighting, providing a little bit more details on the Mozambique Pemba Lichinga Special Agro-Industrial Zone Processing Zone project, which undertook a natural capital approach, and Brittany actually highlighted this particular case study, which harnesses the potential of agriculture to enhance the economy. It was found that 26% of GDP and natural capital contributes to 26% of the GDP and 71% of the workforce. Natural capital approach, the approach itself was targeting more than 4,000 hectares for agroforestry to improve water retention and soil quality. Another target for afforestation, more than 10,000 hectares for afforestation in riparian zones to enhance water regulation and biodiversity. And in particularly this case study highlighted the ecosystem services, focusing on sustainable fuel wood supply, carbon sequestration, erosion control, and water flow regulation. And this particular case assessment itself showed that how these ecosystem services actually contribute to GDP and in terms of actual cost itself. The African Development Bank impact on local development. The natural capital approach enhances energy security and biodiversity. As we've seen, this supported the Mozambique's Green Economy Action Plan. It built technical and institutional capacity for investment decision-making and project appraisal. It encourages climate and conservation co-financing. This particular study showed the value of evaluating your ecosystem services, particularly the key ecosystem services that support the economy. The case study on the Working for Water in South Africa. The objective was to actually remove invasive species to enhance water availability and ecosystem health. The results, this boosted stream flow by 46 million cubic meters per year and creating more than 50,000 jobs annually. The insight, it highlighted the potential for aligning projects with nature-based solutions, principles, and natural capital approaches. Development banks catalyze public-private partnerships and scalable models. This Working for Water flagship initiative from South Africa is recognized as one of the most successful integrated land management programs in the world. the Cape Town Water Fund. This again is recognized as restoring watersheds to enhance water supply and security as well. Some of the opportunities for development finance institutions, strengthen natural capital accounting and data systems at the national level. Peter highlighted some of the highlighted natural capital accounting, and there was a question around how does it actually support subnational governments. I think we have to start at the national level, but again, there are many case examples where this is applicable at the subnational and local levels. From South Africa, there's a case study on supporting on how natural capital accounting is actually supporting the work of the province and in Natal, KwaZulu-Natal. I think this was a very interesting example of using natural capital accounting at the subnational level. There are also local examples of using natural capital accounting at the local level. And but again, looking at how systems, national systems, can support subnational and local level initiatives. Expanding collaboration across the development finance institutions and leveraging resources for sustainable projects. I think this is important, to expand the scope of initiatives, building a pipeline of bankable and nature-based solutions projects with quantified benefits for climate resilience, ecosystem restoration, and socioeconomic benefits, including job creation, food and water security, and improved health and livelihoods. Some of the future initiatives include the African Development Bank will partner on the GF8 Net Zero Nature Positive project, which is upcoming in 2025, where there's a focus on supporting African countries in achieving net zero nature positive outcomes. This particular figure here on my right is actually is a summary of how initiatives by development finance institutions can actually lead to tangible inputs on the ground, as well as towards achieving the African green recovery with a focus on green growth, green economy, and the links with the SDGs and the Agenda 2063. I think just highlighting the potential of natural capital approaches and nature-based solutions, looking at how important it is for a good governance system that actually would drive the green recovery, looking at impacts, economic, social losses from ecosystem degradation, engaging stakeholders, broad stakeholders, attracting private financing, bringing in private financing and other initiatives. And I think Peter actually highlighted some of the possibilities around private financing, providing opportunities for data sharing and reporting. This is an area where private financing can actually interface with some of the initiatives involving communities in stewardship from the very beginning. This is critically important. scaling nature-based solutions and natural capital approaches, focusing on building capacity and ensuring sustainable financing, innovating on financing, bundling projects. I think this is, again, critically important, not only to support nature-based solutions, but looking at broader societal benefits. I think this is critically important in terms of limited financing, and I think this is not to say that we just focus on nature-based solutions, but look at broader initiatives and how other projects and initiatives on financing can actually support nature-based solutions and natural capital approaches. Creating jobs, promoting NBS and natural capital approaches as drivers of gender-responsive employment, inclusiveness, and climate biodiversity benefits. Again, looking at the broader picture. This is just a summary of the model, of the governance model that is proposed as part of the policy briefs that were developed under this initiative. So just going forward and reflecting on the evolving role of development finance institutions, as I've said, prioritizing and scaling investments, I think this is going to be critically important going forward in NBS to drive green growth and resilience, leveraging the development finance institutions and partnering with other development finance institutions to unlock funding and expertise. A lot of the donor funding initiatives are now focusing on partnerships and pooling resources to have a greater impact. Again, this is going to be very, very important in terms of financing for nature. Strengthening governance, building trust through effective governance frameworks for large-scale implementation, promoting collaboration, encouraging partnerships across governments, private sector, civil society, communities, including indigenous peoples and local communities. Developing investable projects, building a pipeline of bankable nature-based solution initiatives need to deliver holistically on multiple societal challenges and not just specifically on one particular area. It needs to look at the bigger picture, securing funding, ensuring sustainable financing through mechanisms like green bonds, payments for ecosystem services, blended finance mechanisms, securities, risk profiling, etc. I think is going to be very, very important going forward, not only for development finance institutions, but financing for other institutions, private financing, and governments as well, as Peter highlighted. I think that's my story today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kiruben, for your presentation, and thank you, Kiruben, Peter, Brittany, Innocent, for your interventions today. And before moving to the Q&A session, I would like to highlight that, as Innocent and also Brittany mentioned, that as part of this initiative, CSF and the NC4ADF partnership aim to launch the Natural Capital Academy in 2025. This effort will fill the gap in training courses related to natural capital and development finance and provide knowledge and tools to effectively integrate natural capital into policies, instruments, investments, and portfolios for sustainable and green economy outcomes. And thank you so much to the people who have shared your questions in the chat. Thank you also, Peter, for some of the answers you have already provided. And you can also find in the chat some documents and resources that have been shared by Brittany and Peter. We do have a couple of questions for Peter and Kiruben that I'm going to read now. I think Kiruben, Peter, you answer Ms. Ngao Mubanga question in the chat, but I think that's an interesting question, and maybe if you would like to expand on that answer, you can, I'm just going to read the question to everyone to know. Can these tools that you presented, Peter, be used for accounting for nature and biodiversity externalities in order to assign appropriate volume and price incentives? And I have another question for you. I'm going to read it. It's from Nureddin, but you can also find it in the chat. How should the finance be allocated between the people for livelihood and the environment restoration? So you have two questions there, and then when you answer, I will I will ask the questions for Kiruben.
I can just quickly say something about it, but I'm afraid I don't have all the answers either, because exactly what is being raised here is it's becoming a huge factor, and so there's a lot of reference here to carbon credits market as an example, where things can often go wrong, unfortunately, because I agree with you, the last comment, it's a structural issue, the way those programs were designed, and particularly the voluntary carbon market was designed, has a lot of weaknesses in terms of, how do you share the benefits, who is actually getting the benefits? So a lot of carbon brokers, if you see them going around, the carbon cowboys in Africa, they go around developing projects, securing funding from the voluntary carbon market, and then eventually, of course, they make a deal with local communities, often, or with local authorities. But then eventually, very little of that funding ends up with the custodians of nature, which is the communities. And those are the ones that are making the efforts. I'm fully with the comments made here. For me, it's a structural issue. We see in the carbon markets a lot of players that invested in carbon credits are now posing the question marks and withdrawing and not very keen into jumping into these projects anymore. So there's a contraction there on the market, and this also reflects on the growing market for a similar product that's coming up now. That's biodiversity credits, which is in a way similar to say corporate sector or anyone who wants to contribute to nature or offset in a way their negative impacts, buying similar products which supposedly have a positive impact on biodiversity. So there are a number of factors in there. Maybe Kiruben, you also have some small responses, but I think weaknesses in that, I say that the benefit sharing mechanisms, there's power dynamics often in the projects that are happening. And I say there's a lot of profits taking there from the agents in between. There's a weakness on the side of the certifiers, the ones that are signing off, so to say, on the certified carbon benefits, like the Plan Vivos and so on. Their schemes often don't really internalize some of these factors very well, because they're also in the market for getting as many products as possible. So I think it's a huge challenge. At the level of the Natural Capital for African Development Finance project, certainly the risks is something that's being looked into, those kind of risks. And in a broad level, of course, those are all coming with certain recommendations, but it's high level. I think, again, going to the carbon market, it's a completely different ball game. It's become its own thing with the certifiers behind it. I know there's a lot happening to reevaluate the systems behind it. I'm not so sure if that's for the DFIs, but certainly I would recommend any finance institution that wants to engage to really critically look at the risks associated with carbon projects and as it is. So that's my perception of what's happening on the carbon market, at least. What was the second one you said, Natalia? just quickly.
Yes, let me read it. This is from Nureddin. How should the finance be allocated between the people for livelihood and environment restoration?
So this is in a way related. So as WF, we're working on a couple of schemes at the moment where we recognize that we work a lot with communities, and we're trying to motivate communities, for example, to do effective forest management or even wildlife, living with wildlife. And it's all coming with small projects. So what's missing is the link that communities actually need to be not just motivated, they need to be compensated. They make an effort. The effort could be an active effort in terms of taking activities like surveillance, maintenance, and even a passive effort in terms of making land available and not basically cutting forest for agriculture. If you don't incentivize that in a way with real compensation, it becomes very difficult. So we're working on a scheme called, at the moment we call it wildlife credits. It's basically a scheme where community groups get directly compensated for these efforts. So the efforts are measured, first of all. So there's an actual contract signed with the community group to say, this is what they will do. They will put aside a piece of land, whatever, for conservancy or so on. There's a value attributed, it's being measured, what that's actually happening, and then there's a compensation being paid. For me, that's the only way. If you want to link conservation directly with livelihoods, to do it. You cannot just tell a community, okay, don't grow your food. That you need food production as well. So that is the challenge we're facing as conservationists, in particularly in the African context, with growing population pressure and pressure for economic development.
Thank you, Peter. And I'm going to read a couple of questions for Kiruben. But first, if you would like to expand, Kiruben, in any of the previous questions, let me know too.
Yes, no, just to add to what Peter is saying about, I mean, I think there's a whole discussion going around on biodiversity credits. And from a technical perspective, we are still, unpacking what that really entails. So I'm not going to say a lot more on that, but I think, just looking at the core benefits of carbon credits, exploring how it can actually contribute to biodiversity, natural capital, and using tools like your natural capital accounting, which not necessarily directs benefits to local communities as such directly, but I think there are mechanisms where or examples that show how benefits, how investment in natural capital through natural capital accounting can actually benefit local communities and various levels of society. So I think on inclusion of communities as well, I think it's critically important to have communities part of the problem or part of the solution as well. And ensuring that they contribute to the decision making on natural capital in their landscapes. What we're finding more and more in the various countries that we work is that involving them from the very beginning in the decision making process is critically important going forward. And that's how they actually benefit from the investment through this various models that are being implemented on the ground. So yeah, that's just my take on the inclusion of local communities and benefits to local communities.
Thank you, Kiruben. There are now many questions in the chat. I'm just going to take the last two. One is going to be a little bit more general and the other one a little bit more specific. So please, Kiruben, if you could answer Evans Abondo question. It's asking who is to take the first initiative to determining the natural capital? Is it the government, are communities, or are the NGOs?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think, governments are taking the lead in terms of they are negotiating at international fora all the time on natural resources. And I think it's both a top-down and bottom-up process where the issues on the ground by the communities, by the local people are beginning to surface now at government level, at national level. And these issues, because people want change on the ground. So I think it's both a bottom-up and top-down approach. We need to harness the political will of governments at the higher level, and address the issues of the local people from on the ground. So it's a both bottom-up and top-down approach regarding that.
Thank you, Kiravan. And the last question, there are many other questions in the chat, but Peter is answering some of them. I think that the only one that is left is from Julia Mambo. She asks 2 questions regarding life credits, wildlife credits. I'm going to read one of those. There are a lot of initiatives on conservation by tourism companies in Botswana and Namibia, working with communities, etc. Do they qualify for wildlife credits?
Okay. Should I respond to that? You were saying there's a second question, so I may be doing both at the same time. So so the example here, Julia, first of all, thanks for that question. Yes, you give a good example here. So Namibia is an example where WWF is actively working on wildlife credits. You probably, that's why you're maybe asking the question as well. And it's relatively easy to do it in the context of a country like Namibia, which has a very strong structure in place, working with conservancies, with a central organization, a central fund, community funds for Namibia, conservation funds for Namibia. So there's a structure there. And that's the case where, we've advanced to the stage that we've actually designed what we call wildlife credit certificates, so potential buyers can buy a certificate saying for certain conservation performance by conservancies. So there's a contract with conservancies, as explained before, and they get paid through the CCFN. This is a central fund, and anyone who wants to buy a certificate, basically, therefore buy a piece of conservation impact directly with guaranteed conservation impact. It's still complicated. The market, as I just mentioned in my communication, is the one that's insecure. We were banking on biodiversity credits markets, as I mentioned before, as an upcoming market, which is still very early stage. Certification schemes are not yet up and running, so it's just a complex one. It will take time to mature for that, but potentially it's possible. We're looking at local markets, particularly offsetting markets for local companies who want to buy these kind of certificates at the moment. Just to explain what's happening, and likely we are certainly looking at expanding it into Botswana and other parts of the Kasa landscape, because there are many similarities there in terms of ways of working. What was the other question? Let me see. Yeah, the tourism companies. So actually, we look at tourism companies as potentially buyers of these kind of wildlife credit certificates, and finding a different way of them working with communities in a more structured way, as opposed to the more one-on-one approaches. I don't know whether it will work out. Actually, we're engaging with the association in Namibia at the moment to see if we can make those links with the tourism sector. But principally, they are really interested that funding, that whatever is leveraged from wildlife credits or the certificates, goes straight into the conservancies. So it's to the maximum amount possible. Of course, there's always small overhead costs in terms of monitoring, but we're finding ways of the money going actually to the people, And that's the change we want to make in terms of it just going to conservation agents and local NGOs. The funding that is leveraged through the sale of the credit should go straight to the conservancies and the people.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter, for your answers. And just for the closing remarks, because we're running out of time, actually, we're run out of time, I would like to invite you, Peter, and also Peter Katanisa, the Africa NCA Community of Practice Coordinator, to give us the closing remarks.
I think Durrell will say a few words. I'll hand over to him.
Hi, Peter. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks so much. And thanks, Natalia, for moderating this interesting session, as well as the NCA COP Secretariat, Peter Katanisa and World Bank, for giving us this opportunity to share some of our insights on the work we've done on mainstreaming natural capital in African development finance. But I think what we've heard here today, I mean, from Innocent's opening remarks on the positioning of natural capital within Africa's development conversation, I think that is growing in currency. We've seen, and he was just talking about the discussions that happened at the COP29 in Baku, where the African Development Bank, as well as the different African leaders, did insist on the need of, or did insist on the fact that Africa's natural wealth needs to become a key bargaining chip for them when it comes to some of these negotiations. And so I think the work that WWF and the other partners like the African Development Bank, GGKP, and now the NCA COP have done so far is really positioning this conversation within this context. And we hope that as we move into 2025, where we intend now to start rolling out some of the products we've produced under the study, under this project, we'll have an opportunity to start bringing together some of the opinions. I saw quite a number of interesting questions, like the optimism that we express when it comes to valuation. I know there have been a lot of discussions on that, and sometimes very controversial at the same time, but we think that the way to move forward is to ensure that Africa's natural capital or natural wealth become an integral part in its development trajectory, especially when we start looking at transitioning, the whole question about transitioning, then it becomes one of those things we want to look for. So I thank you so much for making time, and really thank Peter, as well as the whole World Bank staff, for giving us this platform. Thanks, and over to you.
Oh, thank you, Joel. Thank you. I really want to start by uploading the team for the wonderful knowledge and experience and case studies that they have shared with the COP members. This is, we've seen a lot of interaction, a lot of interest from the COP members to really learn from the experts from our partner institutions. Thank you so much, AfDB. Thank you so much, CSF. Thank you so much, WWF. Thank you so much, UNEP-WCMC. We really appreciate that the work that you have put into this, and we want to congratulate you on a very successful webinar. All members of the community of practice have been here up to the end. So this shows that the interest is there, and this really touches on their daily lives in their respective countries. So we need to focus on actually organizing more training sessions and webinar. And we actually very pleased to hear that there is a Natural Capital Academy, which is on the horizon to be launched. And actually we would like to request all the partner institutions here to share more information, and maybe to even organize a specific webinar to really focus on how this academy is going to serve countries in terms of meeting their capacity needs, in terms of responding to some of the questions that have been asked here, but also making sure that the right partner institutions within these respective countries can actually share the practical knowledge in terms of how they are integrating natural capital into their financial decision-making processes. And I strongly believe that from this discussion, we can learn and share some of the tools and the methodologies that are being used for integrating this natural capital into investment and bankable projects within the respective countries. So thank you very much, and thank you all the team, thank you all members for joining this webinar, and we invite you to join in the next webinars that are upcoming, and we'll be communicating to you. Thank you all and have a nice day.